There is a number that Tesla would rather nobody looked at too closely. And it arrived quietly in the first quarter of 2026. 358,000 cars delivered, below what analysts expected and lower than the same period the year before. That makes it the third consecutive year in which the company has moved fewer vehicles than it did previously. For a business built on the assumption of permanent growth, 3 years of shrinking numbers is not a rough patch. It is a pattern, and patterns tend to force decisions. The decision, it seems, has already been made behind closed doors. Reuters reported that Tesla has been calling suppliers again, asking about parts and volumes for a compact sport utility vehicle priced around $25,000. Not one anonymous whisper, but 4 independent sources describing the same conversations. And here is the part that makes the story genuinely strange. This is the same vehicle Elon Musk personally killed in 2024, when he told the world that building an affordable car had become pointless because robotaxis would make ordinary ownership obsolete. 2 years later, that philosophy appears to have quietly expired. Nothing about physics changed. Nothing about the technology changed. What changed was roughly 500,000 annual deliveries evaporating from the balance sheet, and the arrival of competitors who did not wait for permission. Chevrolet now sells a redesigned Bolt with 303 miles of range for under $30,000. Nissan is playing in the same territory. And BYD keeps taking market share in essentially every country where Tesla is not the only option on the menu. That last detail deserves more attention than it usually gets. For years, Tesla's dominance was often described as technological superiority, when a large portion of it was simply the absence of anyone else in the room. Once the room fills up, the story changes. A buyer standing in a dealership in 2026 has real alternatives at real prices, and those alternatives do not require a compromise on range or on modern software. The customer who once had to stretch their budget to reach Tesla now has somewhere else to spend the money. Tesla's own filings hint that the company understands this. A first-quarter regulatory document referenced next-generation platform vehicles arriving without ever naming them, which is the corporate equivalent of clearing one's throat before an announcement. Tesla's operation in China issued a denial about the compact SUV, though that carries limited weight. The same company denied the cancellation of the cheaper model right before Reuters turned out to be entirely correct about it. Denials, in this particular history, have a poor track record of aging well. So the picture that emerges is not a rumor floating in isolation. It is a set of connected signals appearing at exactly the moment when the financial pressure to build a cheaper car has become impossible to ignore. 4 sources: a supply chain being quietly rebuilt, a filing that gestures at something unnamed, and a chief executive whose stated reasoning happens to reverse itself precisely when the sales figures demand it. What that car actually is, in physical terms, is where the details start getting specific. That missing component is a second electric motor. According to the reporting, the compact SUV will run a single motor, and a great many people are going to read that specification and immediately translate it into a different word entirely. Stripped down. Basic. The cheap one. That translation deserves to be challenged because it imports an assumption from combustion engines that simply does not carry over into electric ones, and the confusion costs buyers real money every year. The clearest evidence sits in Tesla's own current lineup. The 2026 Model 3 Standard uses a single motor driving the rear wheels and sells for $36,990. Edmunds named it the top-rated electric car of 2026, scoring it an 8.1 out of 10 and describing it as very close to the ideal balance of everything a person actually needs. That is not a review of a compromised product. That is a review of a product where somebody made disciplined choices and refused to pay for capability nobody uses. In a gasoline car, cutting cylinders means cutting the fundamental character of the engine, sacrificing smoothness and power delivery. An electric motor works nothing like that. It is a single rotating assembly with very few moving parts, delivering full torque from a standstill, requiring almost no maintenance across its life. Removing one does not degrade the remaining motor in any way. It removes weight, removes cost, removes wiring, removes cooling complexity, and removes an entire component that can eventually fail. The honest question is, what the second motor actually buys the average owner. It buys acceleration that gets used for a handful of seconds per week, and it buys additional traction that matters in genuinely difficult conditions, which most drivers encounter rarely. What it costs, meanwhile, is a permanent weight penalty carried on every trip, several $1,000s of purchase price, and a more complicated machine to keep running. Dual motors are legitimately excellent. So is declining to pay $8,000 for a capability that goes unused for approximately 360 days a year. Stack the single motor on top of the weight reduction already discussed, and something more useful emerges than raw performance: efficiency. A lighter vehicle with a simpler powertrain consumes fewer kilowatt-hours per mile, which changes the arithmetic of ownership at the most basic level. The cost of driving 1 mile drops. The battery required to reach an acceptable range shrinks. And the shrinking of that battery is not a small savings, because the battery has always been the single most expensive object in any electric car. That is the real story hiding inside a specification that sounds like a downgrade. The engineering is not about what the vehicle lacks compared to a more expensive Tesla. It is about what a vehicle can accomplish once it stops carrying components designed to win arguments on a spec sheet. And once the powertrain has been simplified this aggressively, the entire price target begins to hinge on a single remaining question, which is what exactly is going inside that battery pack. In March 2026, the United States Department of the Interior confirmed that Tesla signed a $4.3 billion agreement with LG Energy Solution to manufacture lithium iron phosphate cells domestically. The facility is a purpose-built plant in Lansing, Michigan, with production scheduled to begin in 2027. That chemistry, abbreviated as LFP, is not a minor variation on what sits inside most premium electric vehicles today. It is a fundamentally different recipe, and the difference explains how a $25,000 price target stops being a fantasy and starts being arithmetic. Most high-end electric cars rely on cathodes built around nickel and cobalt. Both metals are expensive. Both come from a small number of countries with complicated politics attached. Both have a history of violent price swings that no manufacturer can control or predict. LFP replaces them with iron and phosphate. Iron happens to be one of the most abundant materials on the planet, and phosphate is not far behind. Removing supply chain volatility from the most expensive part of the car is worth more than any single engineering trick. The cost gap is measurable rather than theoretical. At the cell level, LFP runs somewhere around $98 per kilowatt-hour, while nickel-based chemistries sit closer to $112 to $120. On a pack of roughly 50 kilowatt-hours, which is a reasonable estimate for a vehicle this size, the savings amount to real money before a single body panel has been welded. Multiply that across hundreds of thousands of units, and the entire business case for a cheap Tesla stops looking impossible. Yet the price advantage may not even be the most valuable thing LFP brings to an owner. The durability is. Lithium iron phosphate cells tolerate thousands of full charge cycles with remarkably little degradation, which changes daily behavior in a way people underestimate until they live with it. Nickel-based packs come with an unwritten rulebook: charge to 80%. Avoid sitting at full. Treat the battery carefully, like a patient recovering from surgery, and hope the capacity holds. LFP largely erases that rulebook. Plugging in every night and charging to 100% is not an act of self-sabotage, but the recommended routine. The car simply arrives full every morning, year after year, and the owner stops thinking about the battery at all. For a first-time electric vehicle buyer, that removes the single largest source of anxiety in the entire ownership experience, which is the quiet suspicion that the most expensive component is slowly dying. Precision matters here, so the boundaries of what is known should be stated plainly. The $4.3 billion deal is confirmed, and it is aimed primarily at Tesla's Megapack energy storage business rather than at any specific car. Whether this compact SUV uses LFP has never been officially stated by anyone at Tesla. What is known is that the company has used LFP in its standard range vehicles since 2021, is scaling domestic LFP production right now, and that no other chemistry makes this price structurally achievable. The battery, though, is only half of what determines whether this car ages well. The other half is a chip, and Tesla has an uncomfortable history with that particular promise. Around 3 million people bought Teslas equipped with Hardware 3, the computer that began shipping in 2019 alongside a very specific claim. This chip is capable of full self-driving. Some owners paid as much as $15,000 on the strength of that sentence. Over the following years, as the software grew heavier and more demanding, those cars fell steadily further behind, receiving fewer capabilities later and in diminished form. The gap widened quietly, and every explanation offered was a variation on the theme of patience. At the first quarter earnings call in 2026, Musk finally said what many owners had suspected for years. Hardware 3 cannot achieve unsupervised full self-driving. The silicon is not capable of it, and no amount of software optimization changes that fact. Those 3 million owners are now being offered a discounted trade-in program rather than the hardware upgrade they were originally promised. Whatever one thinks of the compensation, the underlying event is simple. A promise was sold, money was collected, and the promise could not be kept. That history is exactly why the chip inside this new compact SUV carries more weight than any other specification on the list. And here, something genuinely unusual happened. On the 15th of April 2026, Musk announced that Tesla's next-generation AI4 chip had completed tape-out, the final design milestone before a semiconductor goes into fabrication. That alone would be significant news. What he said immediately afterward was considerably more significant, and it received a fraction of the attention. AI4, he clarified, is sufficient to achieve far better than human safety for full self-driving. AI5 is intended for Optimus, the humanoid robot program, and for Tesla's supercomputer clusters. That sentence deserves to be read slowly because of what it implies. The current generation computer, the one already installed in every Tesla leaving the factory today, the one running the robotaxi fleet operating in Austin right now, is being described by Tesla's own chief executive as enough. Not a placeholder. Not a bridge to something better. The consequence for this compact SUV is direct. If the vehicle ships in 2027 carrying AI4 hardware, that hardware will not be the budget-tier version of Tesla's autonomy stack, quietly excluded from the features that make the expensive cars interesting. It will be the same computer the company has publicly declared adequate for the destination it has been promising for a decade. For the first time in Tesla's history, current generation and future proof might actually describe the same object. Caution remains warranted, and the reason is written into the previous paragraphs. A guarantee from Elon Musk regarding autonomy has historically come with an expiration date measured in disappointment. Enough in Tesla years is a word worth weighing carefully. Still, the structural situation is meaningfully different from the Hardware 3 era. Back then, the company was selling a chip while privately hoping the software would eventually fit inside it. Now the chip is being declared sufficient after the software already exists and drives paying passengers through a city. That distinction matters, and it feeds directly into the most speculative claim of all, which concerns not what the car is, but what it is designed to become. One Tesla employee told Reuters something that slipped through the coverage almost unnoticed. The new vehicle is designed to be driverless, but offers a human-driven option. Read carefully, that is not a small remark. It does not describe a robotaxi with a steering wheel bolted on as a regulatory concession, and it does not describe an ordinary car with autonomy software installed afterward. It describes a machine engineered from the first sketch to function competently in both states, with neither one treated as an afterthought. The practical implication reaches further than the engineering. A person who buys this car in 2027 drives it themselves, the way people have always driven cars. As the software matures and regulators gradually catch up, the same physical vehicle begins doing more of the work on its own, through updates delivered over the air. No trade-in, no new purchase, no showroom visit to acquire the capability that was advertised 3 years earlier. The car simply grows into hardware the owner already paid for. Set that against the ordinary experience of owning an automobile, which almost everyone in this audience has repeated several times across the past 20 years. In every single case, the car driven off the lot in year 1 was the finest version of that car it would ever be. From that moment forward, the trajectory pointed downward. More miles, more wear, fading paint, aging technology, declining value. The vehicle was a depreciating object from the instant it left the building, and everybody accepted this as a law of nature. A software-defined vehicle inverts that assumption, at least partially. The mechanical parts still age, tires still wear, and suspension bushings still eventually give up. But the intelligence of the machine moves in the opposite direction. The car owned in year 3 could plausibly be more capable, safer, and more useful than the one collected in year 1. For a buyer who intends to keep a vehicle for 7 to 10 years, which describes a very large share of this audience, that changes the entire calculation of what the purchase is worth. Restraint is required here because this is the thinnest thread in the entire story. It originates from a single source, unlike the dimensions or the powertrain. Tesla has been promising imminent autonomy since roughly 2016, and next year has become something close to a running joke among people who follow the company closely. Skepticism is not merely permitted on this point. It is the only defensible position until hardware appears in a driveway and does what was advertised. What can be said is that the design intent exists,